At the funeral home planning my mother's service, the director handed me photos showing she didn't fall. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, heavier than it should have been for just photographs. Gerald Whitmore, owner and director of Whitmore and Sons Funeral Home for 32 years, had closed his office door before handing it to me. His face carried an expression I'd seen on doctors delivering bad news, that practiced neutrality that barely concealed something darker underneath. "Mr. Brennan, I need you to look at these before we proceed with the arrangements," he said quietly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, even though we were alone. "I've been in this business since 1991, and I've seen hundreds of fall victims. Your mother's injuries don't match the story." I opened the envelope at 2:14 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, expecting maybe paperwork I'd forgotten to sign, insurance documents, something administrative and forgettable. Instead, I found 8 photographs, professional quality, taken during the intake examination when Mom's body arrived from the county morgue. The first photo showed her face, peaceful, eyes closed, the way I'd last seen her at the hospital before they disconnected life support. The second photo made my hands start shaking. It showed the back of her head, where the supposed fatal injury had occurred. But instead of the single impact point you'd expect from falling downstairs, there were 3 distinct contusions, each at a different angle, each suggesting a separate blow. I'd been handling Mom's affairs for 6 days, ever since the call came at 6:43 a.m. last Saturday from Pinecrest Assisted Living. The facility manager, a woman named Dorothy Vaughn, had used that careful, practiced tone people use when delivering tragedy. "Mr. Brennan, there's been an accident. Your mother fell down the stairs near her apartment. The paramedics are transporting her to Memorial Hospital now, but you should come immediately." I'd made the 30-minute drive from my house in Riverside in 22 minutes, running 2 red lights, my mind racing through memories of Mom's decline over the past 18 months. She'd been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's at 71, nothing catastrophic, just tremors in her left hand, and some balance issues her neurologist said were manageable with medication and physical therapy. When she'd decided to move into Pinecrest 6 months ago, it wasn't because she couldn't live independently, it was because she wanted to be proactive, wanted the security of knowing help was available if she needed it. "I'm not waiting until I'm helpless, David," she'd told me firmly. "I'm making this choice while I still can." The facility was nice, upscale even, catering to active seniors who needed minimal assistance. Mom had a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor, participated in book clubs and watercolor classes, made friends with other residents. She'd seemed happy there, or as happy as someone could be after losing their spouse of 48 years. My father had died 3 years ago from a massive heart attack, sudden and brutal, leaving Mom with a paid-off house, a comfortable pension, and the kind of loneliness that settles into your bones when the person you've built your life around disappears. She'd sold the house after a year, couldn't stand the emptiness, and moved into a smaller condo before ultimately choosing Pinecrest. I visited her every Sunday, took her to her favorite Italian restaurant, listened to her talk about her art classes and the drama between residents that she found simultaneously irritating and entertaining. We were close, closer than many adult children and their aging parents, bound by shared grief over Dad and genuine affection for each other. When I'd arrived at the hospital that Saturday morning, Mom was already in surgery. A nurse, 20-year veteran named Carol Simmons, had explained that Mom had suffered severe head trauma from falling down a flight of stairs, 12 steps from the 2nd-floor landing to the 1st. She was found at the bottom by another resident around 6:15 a.m., Carol said, checking her chart. Unconscious, significant bleeding from a head wound. The paramedics intubated her on scene. She's in surgery now to relieve pressure on her brain. But Mr. Brennan, you should know the neurosurgeon isn't optimistic. The damage is extensive. Mom never woke up. She survived the surgery but remained in a coma, brain activity minimal, life sustained by machines. After 3 days, the doctors, led by Dr. Raymond Foster, 31 years in neurosurgery, sat me down for the conversation I'd been dreading. "Your mother's brain function is severely compromised. The scans show massive damage to the frontal lobe and brainstem. Even if she were to regain consciousness, which is extremely unlikely, she would have no quality of life. As her healthcare proxy, you need to consider whether continuing life support is in her best interests." I'd made the decision on Wednesday, surrounded by paperwork and impossible choices, signing forms that felt like signing her death warrant. They disconnected the machines on Thursday at 11 a.m., and Mom slipped away at 11:37 a.m., her heart finally stopping after her brain had essentially died 3 days earlier. I'd held her hand, told her I loved her, promised I'd be okay, even though I wasn't sure that was true. Losing both parents within 3 years leaves you feeling unmoored, like you're suddenly the oldest generation in your family line, responsible for everything with no one to fall back on. I was 43 years old, unmarried, no kids, working as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. My life was ordinary, stable, maybe a little lonely, but comfortable. Mom had been my anchor, the person I called when I had good news or bad news, or just needed to hear a familiar voice. Now she was gone. Except now Gerald Whitmore was telling me she hadn't just fallen. I stared at the photographs, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The 3 distinct impact points on the back of Mom's skull, each showing different angles of trauma. A 4th photo showed bruising on her upper arms, Symmetrical marks that looked like fingerprints, like someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave impressions. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice coming out hoarse, "what exactly are you telling me?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of his face. "I'm telling you that in 32 years of preparing bodies, I've learned to recognize the difference between accidental trauma and intentional harm. Your mother's injuries are inconsistent with a simple fall downstairs. The head wounds suggest multiple impacts from different angles, and those bruises on her arms indicate she was gripped forcefully, likely while struggling. I believe someone pushed her, or worse, actively caused her fall." The room seemed to tilt. "You're saying someone murdered my mother?" "I'm saying the evidence suggests that possibility strongly enough that I cannot, in good conscience, proceed with the funeral arrangements without bringing it to your attention. I've already contacted the county medical examiner's office. Dr. Lisa Hampton, she's been the ME for 15 years. She's requesting a formal examination of the body before we proceed. This is now a potential homicide investigation." I sat in stunned silence, the photographs still in my hands, trying to process what this meant. Someone had killed Mom. Someone at Pinecrest. Someone who had access to her. Someone who had made it look like an accident. My mind immediately went to the obvious question: who benefits from her death? Mom had a will, straightforward and simple, leaving everything to me as her only child. The estate wasn't massive, maybe $340,000 after the condo sale and her savings, plus a small life insurance policy worth $100,000. Nothing that would inspire murder, or so I'd thought. But then I remembered something that had seemed odd at the time, but that I'd dismissed as grief, clouding my judgment. When I'd gone to Pinecrest to collect Mom's belongings on Friday, the day after she died, I'd run into Veronica Hale, Mom's neighbor in the apartment next door. Veronica was 68, sharp as a tack, a retired schoolteacher who'd befriended Mom when she first moved in. They'd had coffee together most mornings, went to the watercolor classes together, gossiped about the other residents. "David," Veronica had said, catching my arm as I was loading boxes into my car, "I need to tell you something about the morning your mother fell." She'd looked nervous, glancing around like she was worried about being overheard. I heard arguing that morning, around 6 a.m., coming from the stairwell. Two voices, one was definitely your mother, the other sounded male, but I couldn't make out who. They were arguing loud enough that I almost went out to check, but then it went quiet, and I assumed they'd worked it out. 10 minutes later, Dorothy was knocking on my door telling me there'd been an accident. I'd thanked Veronica, filed the information away as potentially important, but hadn't known what to do with it. The police report from the responding officers had classified the incident as accidental. An elderly woman with balance issues falling downstairs, tragic, but not suspicious. No investigation had been opened. But now, sitting in Gerald Whitmore's office with photographs that screamed murder, Veronica's story took on new significance. "I need to call the police," I said, standing abruptly. "If this is murder, they need to investigate immediately." Gerald nodded. "Dr. Hampton is already coordinating with the county sheriff's office. They'll be contacting you soon. In the meantime, I'd recommend you don't discuss this with anyone at Pinecrest. If there is a killer, you don't want to tip them off that we're onto them." I left the funeral home at 2:51 p.m., the manila envelope tucked under my arm, feeling like I'd stepped into an alternate reality. 6 days ago, I'd been grieving my mother's accidental death. Now, I was looking at her murder. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing through possibilities. Who at Pinecrest would want Mom dead? She was friendly, well-liked, didn't have enemies that I knew of. Unless there was something I didn't know, something she hadn't told me. My phone rang at 4:17 p.m. Unknown number, local area code. I answered on the second ring. "Mr. Brennan? This is Detective James Holt, with the County Sheriff's Office, Homicide Division. I've been assigned to investigate the circumstances surrounding your mother's death. I understand the medical examiner flagged some concerns about her injuries. I need to meet with you as soon as possible to discuss the case." We arranged to meet at my house in an hour. Detective Holt arrived at 5:23 p.m., 15 years on the force according to the credentials he showed me, late 30s, carrying himself with the weary competence of someone who'd seen too much death. He set up a digital recorder on my kitchen table and pulled out a notebook. "Mr. Brennan, I've reviewed the initial police report from the incident, the hospital records, and the preliminary notes from Dr. Hampton at the ME's office. The funeral director's observations about the inconsistencies in your mother's injuries are significant. I need you to walk me through everything you know about the days leading up to her fall, anyone she'd had conflicts with, any changes in her behavior or routine, anything that seemed off." I told him everything. About Mom's move to Pinecrest 6 months ago, her active social life there, my weekly visits, the phone calls we'd exchange between visits. I mentioned Veronica hearing the argument that morning, and Detective Holt's pen stopped moving. "An argument?" The initial report made no mention of that. Did this witness give any other details? Just that it was around 6 a.m., in the stairwell near Mom's apartment, that she heard my mother's voice and a male voice arguing loudly. Then it went quiet. She assumed they'd resolved whatever it was and went about her morning. When she heard about the fall, She didn't connect the two events until later. Detective Holt made extensive notes. I'll need to interview this Veronica, get her full statement. Anyone else at the facility you think I should talk to? I thought about it. Dorothy Vaughn, the facility manager. She was the one who called me that morning. And there's a nurse who works the overnight shift. I think her name is Amanda Cross. She was on duty that night. Mom mentioned her a few times, said she was nice. And there's a maintenance worker, older guy, maybe early 60s. I saw him around when I visited but never got his name. Mom said he was creepy, kept finding excuses to come into her apartment to fix things that weren't broken. The detective's pen moved faster. Creepy how? Just too friendly, too interested in the female residents. Mom said he'd linger too long, make comments about how they looked, stuff that made her uncomfortable. She'd complained to Dorothy about it, but nothing changed. Did your mother have any romantic relationships at Pinecrest? Anyone she was particularly close with? The question caught me off guard. Mom? No, she wasn't dating anyone. She was still grieving Dad, wasn't interested in that kind of thing. Why? Sometimes disputes over romantic attention can turn violent, especially in close quarters environments like assisted living facilities. Jealousy, rejection, those are common motives. I shook my head. That wasn't Mom's situation. She kept to herself mostly. Had a few friends like Veronica, but nothing romantic. Detective Holt continued asking questions for another 30 minutes, building a timeline of Mom's last weeks, identifying potential witnesses and suspects. When he finally packed up his recorder, he gave me his card. Mr. Brennan, I need you to understand this is now an active homicide investigation. Don't discuss the details with anyone at Pinecrest or anyone who might be connected to this case. We'll be conducting interviews over the next few days, and I don't want potential suspects tipped off. Also, I'm going to need access to your mother's apartment at Pinecrest, with your permission. There may be evidence there that was overlooked in the initial response. You have my permission for whatever you need. I want whoever did this caught. He nodded. We'll do everything we can. Dr. Hampton is conducting a full autopsy tomorrow morning. Once we have those results, we'll have a clearer picture of what happened. I'll be in touch. After Detective Holt left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the manila envelope from the funeral home. The photographs were still inside, evidence of violence done to my mother in what should have been a safe place. I thought about her moving into Pinecrest, how she'd been excited about the art classes and the book club, how she'd told me she felt secure there. Someone had betrayed that security, had taken advantage of her vulnerability, had killed her, and tried to make it look like an accident. I needed to know who and why. Against Detective Holt's advice, I decided to do some investigating of my own, not confronting anyone directly, just gathering information, talking to people who might know something. I called Veronica at 7:30 p.m., got her number from Mom's phone contacts. She answered on the first ring, her voice cautious. David, I've been thinking about you, about your mother. How are you holding up? Not great, Veronica. The funeral director noticed some inconsistencies with Mom's injuries. The police are investigating her fall as a potential homicide now. Sharp intake of breath. Oh my God. I knew something felt wrong about that morning. The argument, the timing, it didn't add up to just an accident. That's why I'm calling. I need you to tell me everything you remember, every detail, no matter how small. Who else was around that morning? Did you see anyone near the stairwell before or after the argument? Veronica was quiet for a moment, thinking. It was early, around 5:45 a.m. I was up making coffee, couldn't sleep, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, definitely male. I looked through my peephole and saw someone walking toward the stairwell, but I couldn't see who, because the angle was wrong. A few minutes later, I heard the arguing start. Your mother's voice was clear. She was saying something like, "You can't do this, and I won't let you." But the man's voice was lower, harder to make out. It went on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, getting more heated, then suddenly it stopped. Complete silence. I waited, expecting to hear footsteps again, but nothing. Then maybe 10 minutes later, I heard Dorothy screaming for someone to call 911. You didn't see the man leave? No, and that's what's been bothering me. If he left the stairwell, I should have heard footsteps in the hallway, but I didn't hear anything. Either he went down to the first floor and exited through another door, or he was still there when Dorothy found your mother. That detail sent chills down my spine. If the man was still there when Dorothy arrived, and if he was the one who pushed Mom, then Dorothy might have seen him, might know who he was, unless Dorothy was involved somehow. Veronica, did you tell the police any of this when they responded that morning? They didn't ask me anything. They took Dorothy's statement and the paramedics' report, classified it as an accidental fall, and left. I didn't think to volunteer information because at the time I didn't realize it was relevant. It wasn't until later that I started putting pieces together. Detective Holt will be contacting you for a formal statement. Tell him exactly what you told me, every detail. I will. David, be careful. If someone at Pinecrest killed your mother, they're still there, walking around like nothing happened. That's terrifying. She was right. I thanked her and hung up, my mind churning through possibilities. I needed to know more about the people who had access to Mom, who might have had motive to harm her. I pulled up Pinecrest's website on my laptop and navigated to their staff directory. Dorothy Vaughn, facility manager, 49 years old, 12 years with Pinecrest. Amanda Cross, registered nurse, 32 years old, 5 years at the facility. And there, listed under maintenance, was Thomas Grayson, 58 years old, 8 years at Pinecrest. The creepy maintenance worker Mom had complained about. I did a basic Google search on Thomas Grayson's name plus the city. What came back made my blood run cold. A news article from 11 years ago, before he worked at Pinecrest, detailed his arrest for assault. He'd been accused of attacking a female tenant at an apartment complex where he worked, claimed she'd invited him into her unit. She said he'd forced his way in. The charges had been reduced to trespassing in a plea deal, and he'd served 6 months probation. This was the man who had unsupervised access to vulnerable elderly women, including my mother, and Pinecrest had hired him despite his record. I took screenshots of the articles, emailed them to Detective Holt with a note about Mom's complaints. Then I did searches on Dorothy Vaughn and Amanda Cross. Dorothy had a LinkedIn profile showing a steady career in senior care management, no red flags. Amanda had a Facebook page, mostly private, but her public photos showed a young woman who seemed normal, professionally dressed in her nursing scrubs in most pictures. Nothing obviously suspicious, but also nothing that ruled them out as suspects. I spent the next 2 hours going through Mom's phone records, looking for unusual calls or texts in the weeks before her death. Most were mundane, conversations with friends, appointment reminders, texts to me about grocery lists or when I'd be visiting. But there was one number that appeared frequently in the past month, always calling late at night, between 10 p.m. and midnight. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, just appeared as digits. I called it from my phone at 9:45 p.m., unsure what I expected. It rang 4 times, then a man answered. Yeah? Gruff voice, older, immediately defensive. Who is this? I'm calling about Eleanor Brennan. This number called her phone repeatedly in the past month. I'm her son, and she recently died. I'm trying to understand who you are and why you were calling her. Long pause. Then, Eleanor's dead? What happened? She fell down the stairs at Pinecrest, or someone pushed her. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Who are you? Another pause, longer this time. My name's Frank Ostrander. I was a friend of your mother's. We met at the Pinecrest Book Club about 4 months ago. Started talking, getting coffee, that kind of thing. She never mentioned me? The jealousy angle Detective Holt had mentioned suddenly seemed relevant. No, she never did. How close were you? Close enough that I was planning to ask her to dinner outside of Pinecrest, see where things went. But she'd been pulling back the past few weeks, said she needed space. I kept calling trying to understand what changed, but she stopped answering. I thought maybe she'd met someone else or just wasn't interested anymore. I didn't know she died. Jesus, I'm sorry. He sounded genuinely shocked and upset, but I'd learned that people could fake emotions convincingly. Mr. Ostrander, did Mom ever mention anyone at Pinecrest who made her uncomfortable? Anyone who seemed too interested in her or who she'd had conflicts with? She mentioned the maintenance guy, said he gave her the creeps, and she'd complained about the facility manager a few times, said Dorothy was more concerned about Pinecrest's reputation than actually helping residents with problems. But nothing that seemed dangerous. Why? Do the police think someone hurt her? They're investigating. You should expect a call from Detective Holt. He'll want to interview you. I'll talk to him, tell him whatever I know. Eleanor was a good person. If someone hurt her, they need to pay. We ended the call, and I added Frank Ostrander to the growing list of people who needed investigation. A romantic interest Mom had never mentioned, who'd been calling her repeatedly, who might have been rejected. That fit a classic motive profile. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't stop thinking about Mom's last moments, wondering if she'd known what was happening, if she'd been afraid, if she'd called out for help that never came. The next morning, Saturday, Detective Holt called at 8:03 a.m. Mr. Brennan, Dr. Hampton completed the autopsy. The findings confirm our suspicions. Your mother had 3 distinct impact points on her skull, each from a different angle, suggesting she was struck multiple times. The bruising on her arms shows she was grabbed forcefully before the fall. There are also defensive wounds on her hands, scrapes and bruising consistent with her trying to fight off an attacker. This is definitely a homicide. We've opened a full investigation. My hands clenched around the phone. Do you have any suspects? We're interviewing everyone who had access to your mother that morning. Thomas Grayson, the maintenance worker, has already lawyered up, which is interesting but not conclusive. We're also looking at Frank Ostrander, the man who'd been calling your mother. His story about a romantic relationship checks out. We have witness statements from other Pinecrest residents who saw them together, but rejection is a powerful motive. And we're investigating Dorothy Vaughn and Amanda Cross, though neither has an obvious motive yet. What about security cameras? Pinecrest must have surveillance footage from that morning. They do, and that's where it gets complicated. The cameras in the hallways were functioning, but the camera covering the specific stairwell where your mother fell had malfunctioned 2 days before the incident. It was offline, no footage available. Very convenient timing. Too convenient. Someone had planned this, had disabled the camera knowing they'd need to attack Mom in that specific location without being recorded. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of violence. This was premeditated murder. Detective, what can I do to help? Stay available, don't leave town, and let me do my job. I know you want answers, but interfering with witnesses or suspects could compromise the investigation. Trust the process. I promised I would, but I had no intention of sitting idle while my mother's killer walked free. I drove to Pinecrest at 10:30 a.m., telling myself I was just collecting the last of Mom's belongings, not investigating. The facility looked pleasant in the late morning sun, well-maintained grounds, cheerful paint, nothing that suggested the violence that had occurred there a week ago. I checked in at the front desk with a young receptionist I didn't recognize, showed my ID, got a visitor's badge. I'm here to finish clearing out my mother's apartment, Eleanor Brennan, Unit 214. The receptionist's face fell. Oh, Mr. Brennan, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mrs. Brennan was such a lovely person. Let me get someone to escort you upstairs. She made a quick phone call, and moments later, Dorothy Vaughn appeared, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. David, I'm glad you came by. I wanted to express my condolences again. Your mother was a valued member of our community. This tragedy has affected all of us deeply. I studied her face, looking for signs of guilt or deception, but she was practiced, smooth, the perfect administrator. Thank you, Dorothy. I won't take long, just need to pack up the last few things. She led me to the elevator, making small talk about the weather, completely inappropriate given the circumstances but filling the awkward silence. On the second floor, we walked past the stairwell where Mom had died. I stopped, stared at the stairs descending to the first floor, tried to imagine what had happened here. Dorothy noticed my hesitation. I know this is difficult, if you need a moment. I need to know what happened. You were the first one to find her that morning. What did you see? Dorothy's expression shifted, became guarded. I already gave my statement to the police. I came in for my shift at 6 a.m., was doing my morning rounds, and found Eleanor at the bottom of the stairs. She was unconscious, bleeding from her head. I immediately called 911. Did you see anyone else? Hear anything? No, the hallway was empty. It was early. Most residents were still in their apartments. I didn't believe her. Veronica had heard arguing, had heard footsteps, but Dorothy claimed to have seen and heard nothing. Either she was lying, or she was remarkably unobservant for someone who supposedly cared about residents' safety. We continued to Mom's apartment, and Dorothy unlocked the door. The space looked exactly as it had the last time I'd visited. Watercolor paintings on the walls, bookshelves filled with mysteries and romance novels, the small kitchen where she'd made tea and cookies when I came by. Take your time, Dorothy said. I'll be in my office if you need anything. She left, and I was alone with Mom's belongings and my grief. I started packing methodically, boxing up clothes, books, kitchen items, trying not to think about how she'd never need any of this again. In her bedroom closet, I found a lockbox I hadn't noticed before, small fireproof safe pushed to the back. It had a combination lock, and I tried Mom's birthday, my birthday, her anniversary with Dad. Nothing. Then I tried the date Dad had died, August 22nd, 2020. The lock clicked open. Inside were documents, Mom's will, which I already had a copy of, some old photos, Dad's death certificate, and a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in Mom's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was dated 3 weeks before her death. David, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I need you to know that I've been threatened. Thomas Grayson, the maintenance worker here, has been making increasingly aggressive advances toward me. I rejected him clearly, told Dorothy, but nothing was done. Last week he cornered me in the laundry room and told me if I didn't be nice to him, I'd regret it. I'm scared, but I don't want to worry you or involve the police over what might just be empty threats. I'm being careful, staying in my apartment more, avoiding situations where I'm alone with him. But if something happens, if I fall or have an accident, please know it wasn't random. Thomas Grayson is dangerous. I love you. Be safe. Mom. The letter fell from my hands. She'd known. She'd known she was in danger and hadn't told me, hadn't gotten help, had tried to handle it herself. And now she was dead, murdered by the man she'd specifically named as a threat. I took photos of the letter with my phone, texted them to Detective Holt immediately with a message. Found this in Mom's apartment. She knew Grayson was threatening her. She told Dorothy. Dorothy did nothing. Detective Holt called me back within 5 minutes. Where are you right now? At Pinecrest, in Mom's apartment. Don't move. I'm sending officers there now to secure the letter as evidence and to bring in Thomas Grayson and Dorothy Vaughn for formal questioning. This changes everything. I waited in Mom's apartment, the letter carefully placed back in the lockbox, hands trembling with rage. Dorothy had known Mom was being threatened and had done nothing, prioritized Pinecrest's reputation over a resident's safety, and Thomas Grayson had followed through on his threats, had murdered my mother for rejecting him. 2 uniformed deputies arrived at 11:52 a.m., collected the letter as evidence, took my statement about where I'd found it. They asked me to wait in the apartment while they located Grayson and Vaughn. Through Mom's window, I watched as Dorothy was escorted to a police car, her professional facade cracking, gesturing frantically and talking rapidly to the officers. Moments later, another car arrived, and Thomas Grayson was brought out in handcuffs, his face red with anger. Detective Holt arrived at 12:34 p.m., met me in Mom's apartment with a grim expression. We're taking both of them in for questioning. The letter is powerful evidence, establishes motive for Grayson and negligence for Vaughn. But I need more to make charges stick. The letter proves your mother felt threatened, but it doesn't prove Grayson actually pushed her. We need physical evidence, witnesses, something that puts him at the scene at the time of the attack. What about the argument Veronica heard? Can she identify Grayson's voice? I interviewed her this morning. She heard a male voice but couldn't identify it specifically as Grayson. It's circumstantial, helpful, but not enough for a murder conviction. I need something solid. I thought desperately. What about his work records? If he was on duty that morning, if his time card shows he was in the building, doesn't that help? We're pulling all employment records now, but Grayson lives in the basement maintenance apartment here at Pinecrest, part of his compensation. He's always in the building, so proving he was present doesn't necessarily prove he was at the stairwell at 6 a.m. There had to be something, some piece of evidence we were missing. I thought back to the security camera that had conveniently malfunctioned. Detective, you said the stairwell camera was offline 2 days before Mom's fall. Who reported the malfunction? Who would have known it was down? Detective Holt's eyes sharpened. Good question. I'll find out. He made a call, spoke in low tones to someone, then hung up. According to Pinecrest's maintenance logs, Thomas Grayson reported the camera malfunction and tagged it for repair. He was the one who knew it was offline. That wasn't coincidence. Grayson had disabled the camera himself, creating a blind spot where he could attack Mom without being recorded. That's premeditation, I said. He planned this. It's suspicious, but still circumstantial. A defense attorney could argue he reported a legitimate malfunction and had no connection to your mother's fall. I need physical evidence linking him to the scene. DNA, fingerprints, something that can't be explained away. We were interrupted by one of the deputies calling Detective Holt over. They spoke quietly, and when Holt returned, his expression had changed. They found something in Grayson's apartment. A phone, not his personal phone, a burner phone with texts between him and someone named Tommy. The texts reference taking care of the Brennan problem and discuss timing. They're going through it now, but this could be what we need. Tommy, another person involved. This wasn't just Grayson acting alone. Who's Tommy? We're working on identifying him. The number is registered to a prepaid account, but we'll trace it. If there's a conspiracy here, if Grayson had help, everyone involved is going down. The investigation moved quickly after that. Within hours, the police identified Tommy as Thomas Beckett, 34 years old, Grayson's nephew, with a criminal record including assault and battery. Beckett was arrested at his apartment in the suburbs at 3:15 p.m., and under questioning, he broke almost immediately. According to Detective Holt's update later that evening, Beckett confessed to helping his uncle plan the murder. Grayson told Beckett that your mother was going to file a formal complaint against him for harassment, which would have gotten him fired and potentially arrested given his prior assault conviction. He wanted her silenced before that could happen. Beckett helped him disable the security camera and was supposed to be the lookout that morning, but he got cold feet and didn't show up. Grayson went through with it anyway, confronted your mother in the stairwell when she left her apartment for her morning walk, argued with her, and when she threatened to scream, he grabbed her arms to silence her and pushed her down the stairs. He hit her head against the wall multiple times to make sure she couldn't identify him, then fled back to his apartment. Beckett's testimony gives us everything we need for first-degree murder charges. I sat in my living room processing this information, feeling sick. Mom had been planning to file a formal complaint, had been gathering courage to fight back, and it had gotten her killed. If only she'd told me, if only I'd known, I could have helped her, could have protected her. What about Dorothy Vaughn? I asked. She knew Grayson was threatening Mom, did nothing about it. Isn't that criminal? We're pursuing charges of negligent homicide and willful endangerment. Your mother's letter establishes that Dorothy was informed of the threat and failed to act to protect a vulnerable resident. She prioritized avoiding negative publicity for Pinecrest over resident safety, and that directly contributed to your mother's death. She'll likely lose her job and face criminal charges, though probably not as severe as Grayson's. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The next days were a blur of legal proceedings, witness statements, and media coverage. The story broke in local news, assisted living facility murder cover-up, and Pinecrest's reputation imploded. Families pulled their relatives out, the state opened an investigation into the facility's safety protocols, and multiple former residents came forward with their own complaints about Grayson's harassment that had been ignored by management. Thomas Grayson was formally charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence. His nephew, Thomas Beckett, was charged as an accessory to murder and conspiracy. Dorothy Vaughn was charged with negligent homicide and criminal negligence causing death. All three were denied bail, held in county jail pending trial. The funeral finally happened 3 weeks after Mom's death, small and private, just close friends and family. Veronica attended, crying openly, apologizing to me repeatedly for not doing more that morning. I should have gone out into the hallway, she said. I should have checked, should have called for help immediately. Maybe I could have saved her. You gave us the information that helped solve this, I told her. You're a witness, Veronica. Without your testimony about the argument, we might never have known this was murder. Mom would be grateful. Gerald Whitmore, the funeral director who'd started all of this by showing me those photographs, attended as well. I thanked him privately for his courage in speaking up. I've seen too many suspicious deaths get written off as accidents because no one wanted to ask difficult questions, he said. Your mother deserved better. I'm glad we could get her justice. The trial took 8 months to reach court. I attended every day of proceedings, sitting in the gallery watching as prosecutors presented the overwhelming evidence against Thomas Grayson. The letter Mom had written naming him as a threat, Beckett's testimony about the conspiracy, the disabled security camera, the burner phone texts, the forensic evidence showing Mom had been grabbed and struck multiple times before falling. The defense tried to argue that Mom's Parkinson's made her unstable, that the fall could have been accidental, even with the argument that Beckett's testimony was unreliable because he was trying to reduce his own charges. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Thomas Grayson was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Thomas Beckett received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. Dorothy Vaughn was convicted of negligent homicide and criminal negligence, sentenced to 5 years in prison and permanent revocation of her license to work in any care facility. The civil suits followed. I sued Pinecrest on behalf of Mom's estate for wrongful death, negligent hiring, and failure to protect residents. The facility settled for $2.3 million rather than face a trial that would have destroyed what little reputation they had left. The money didn't matter, couldn't bring Mom back, but I used it to establish a foundation in her name advocating for better safety protocols and oversight in assisted living facilities. If one person was saved because of what happened to Mom, her death wouldn't be completely meaningless. It's been 2 years now. Pinecrest closed 18 months ago, couldn't recover from the scandal. The building stands empty, a monument to institutional failure and preventable tragedy. I still visit Mom's grave every Sunday, bring flowers, tell her about my week, about the foundation's work, about the lives we've helped protect. Sometimes I think about that letter she wrote, hidden in her closet, her insurance policy in case the worst happened. She'd known she was in danger but had tried to handle it alone, not wanting to burden me, not wanting to seem weak or paranoid. If I could go back, I'd tell her to burden me, to call me immediately, to let me help. But I can't go back. All I can do is move forward, making sure other families don't have to experience this same loss, this same betrayal of trust. Gerald Whitmore called me last month, asked if I'd be willing to speak at a conference for funeral directors about recognizing signs of elder abuse and murder disguised as accidents. Your mother's case changed how I approach every body that comes through my doors, he said. I want other directors to have that same awareness, to be willing to ask the hard questions even when it's uncomfortable. I agreed. If Mom's story can teach others to look closer, to not accept convenient explanations, to fight for truth even when systems pressure them to look away, then maybe some good can come from this nightmare. Detective Holt retired last year, 26 years on the force, and he told me at his retirement party that Mom's case was the one he was most proud of solving. We got justice for Eleanor, he said. Not every family gets that closure. Hold on to it. I do. Every day, I hold on to the fact that Mom's killer is behind bars, that the people who enabled him faced consequences, that the truth came out despite attempts to bury it. It doesn't erase the loss, doesn't fill the hole her absence left in my life, but it means she didn't die in vain, didn't become just another statistic of elder abuse swept under the rug. Sometimes I still think about those photographs Gerald Whitmore showed me, the evidence of violence that everyone else had missed or ignored. 3 impact points instead of 1. Bruises that told a story of struggle, a funeral director willing to risk professional relationships to speak truth. If he hadn't shown me those photos, if he'd just gone along with the accidental death narrative, Grayson would still be working at Pinecrest, still harassing vulnerable women, still a threat. Mom's murder would have been the perfect crime, written off as a tragic accident, forgotten within weeks. Instead, the truth came out. Justice was served. The system that failed to protect Mom when she was alive, at least, didn't fail her in death. That's something. Not enough, never enough, but something. I keep Mom's letter framed on my desk now, a reminder that silence protects predators, that speaking up matters even when you're scared, that institutions often choose reputation over safety. And I keep Gerald Whitmore's card too, the funeral director who refused to look away, who trusted his 3 decades of experience over convenient explanations, who handed me those photographs and changed everything. She didn't fall, he'd said, stating the truth everyone else wanted to avoid. He was right. She didn't fall. She was murdered. And because he had the courage to say so, because he chose truth over ease, my mother's killer will spend the rest of his life in prison. That's justice, imperfect and painful, but real. If you made it this far, hit like. You've earned it.